My name is Marcus Webb, and for 17 years, the basement of Detroit Memorial Hospital has been my reality. People believe a morgue is just cold storage, a passive waiting room for the dead before the funeral. They are wrong. It is an active ecosystem of silence and cold bureaucracy. Most nights are filled only by the hum of compressors and paperwork, but there is one case that defies logic. It wasn't a ghost or an urban legend. It was something far worse because it was real. This is the story of the night. The border between life and death ceased to exist on my shift. The morgue operates 24 hours a day because death does not respect business hours. I have always preferred the night shift, from 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. The hospital transforms after midnight. The frenetic rhythm of the day gives way to a heavy silence, broken only by security rounds and acute cases in the ER. Down in the basement, it is just me and the stainless steel drawers. It is detailed, regulated work requiring respect and precision. We maintain the chain of custody and ensure identification. I never imagined that my routine of order and cleanliness would be the setting for the most traumatic event of my life. The facility is not like in horror movies, with dramatic shadows and dripping pipes. It is a large, well-lit room with white walls and sterilized steel surfaces. We have 12 storage drawers, each individually monitored to maintain exact temperatures. It is a functional medical infrastructure environment designed to suppress decomposition and maintain dignity. I found comfort in that clinical sterility. For me, those walls represented the absolute certainty of the end. But in August 2020, that certainty was brutally ripped away from me by something that should never have happened. It was a Sunday night in late August. One of those stifling summer nights in Detroit where the heat seemed to penetrate even the basement. The air conditioning was working overtime, creating a frigid contrast inside the preparation room. Around 3 in the morning, I received the call from the emergency department. They had a deceased patient ready for transfer. The bureaucratic coldness of the phone call did not prepare anyone for the tragedy to come. The report indicated a woman of only 20 years old, a victim of sudden cardiac arrest at her residence. The origin of this nightmare began long before she reached my desk. Paramedics worked on her for 30 exhausting minutes at the scene, trying to reverse the cardiac arrest, but failed to achieve a return of spontaneous circulation. Following protocols, an emergency physician, via telephone consultation, pronounced her dead at the scene. This is the genesis of the tragedy, a decision made from a distance based on data that seemed conclusive. Her name was Timesha Beauchamp. Young, apparently healthy, with a whole life suddenly interrupted by an unexplained cardiac event. When the orderlies brought the gurney down the service hallway, the mood was heavy. Seeing someone so young under the white sheet always affects the staff, even veterans like me. The cause of death was listed as pending investigation, but the preliminary indication was a cardiac event of unknown origin. My job was not to question the diagnosis or the tragedy, but to receive the body. I needed to document every detail, verify the identification tags, and store her safely until the funeral home arrived. It was supposed to be just another standard procedure in the middle of the night. I helped transfer Timesha to one of our morgue gurneys. She was an African-American woman of average build. Her face displayed that waxy, slack appearance that death brings, with no obvious signs of physical trauma. I logged everything in my record book. Time of arrival at 3:14 a.m. Condition of body intact. No personal effects. Everything seemed finalized. Medical science had spoken, protocols were followed, and her fate seemed sealed. There was no reason to suspect that something impossible was hidden beneath that cold, motionless skin. I assigned Timesha to drawer number 7, which was empty that night. I slid the stainless steel compartment out. The internal temperature is rigorously maintained at 38 degrees Fahrenheit, cold enough to slow biological processes but without freezing the tissues. I positioned the gurney, locked the wheels, and with the practiced efficiency of years, moved her body onto the sliding platform. This moment requires technique and respect. Bodies are heavy and vulnerable. I arranged her, ensuring she was secure and dignified, unaware that I was imprisoning someone in a frozen nightmare. Once she was positioned, I closed the drawer. The heavy steel door sealed with a solid click and a slight hiss as the hermetic seal engaged. The temperature monitor confirmed the environment was in the optimal range. I returned to my desk, updated the whiteboard showing drawer 7 as occupied, and filed the admission documents. It was 3:35 a.m. Timesha Beauchamp was officially in storage, awaiting family arrangements. Silence returned to reign in the morgue, but it was a deceptive silence, charged with a tension I could not yet perceive. The rest of the night passed with frightening quiet. There were no other arrivals. I occupied my time with inventory and cleaning, trying not to think about the young woman lying in drawer 7. Around 5:30, I took my coffee break in the small adjacent room, keeping the door open to hear any calls. At 6:45, I was back at the desk, preparing the end-of-shift reports when I heard it, a sound coming from the refrigeration area. It was not mechanical. It was a dull, distinct, heavy thud, as if something had moved inside. I looked up from the computer, my heart accelerating slightly in response to the unknown. Industrial refrigeration units make noise, compressors cycle on and off, fans spin in monotonous cycles. But that was different. It was not a continuous mechanical hum or a motor vibration. It was a single impact sound, dry and disturbing. I stood up and walked toward the wall of drawers, feeling a chill down my spine that did not come from the air conditioning, but from a primitive instinct of alert. I stopped in front of the stainless steel wall. Visually, everything seemed normal. The doors were sealed, digital monitors displaying the correct temperatures in neon green. I specifically checked the readout for drawer 7, 38 degrees, nominal temperature. No system failure alerts. I was about to turn away, ready to blame the fatigue of the early morning, when I heard it again. Definitely a thud, muffled by thermal insulation, but undeniable, and it was coming, without a shadow of a doubt, from inside drawer 7. My first thought was a desperate attempt at rationalization, a defense of the mind against the absurd. Bodies release gases as cellular decomposition begins. Even under controlled refrigeration, this can cause subtle movements, sounds of fluids, and in rare cases, cadaveric spasms where muscles contract on their own. I have heard gases escaping from corpses that sounded disturbingly like human groans. All of these are natural biological processes, the physics of death continuing its inevitable course. But the logic I was trying to apply had a grave and terrifying flaw. Timesha Beauchamp had been stored for only 3 hours. Decomposition does not produce gases with enough volume or force to create audible impacts in such a short period, especially in a refrigerated environment that slows this process. I approached drawer 7 with caution, as if it were a cage containing something dangerous. I placed my palm flat against the cold steel door and waited, holding my breath, praying for absolute silence. What I felt next defied my 17 years of experience in the morgue. The door vibrated under my palm. It was not the steady, smooth vibration of the cooling motor, but an irregular, frantic human movement. Something inside was physically striking against the metal. I instinctively stepped back, stumbling over my own feet. Dead bodies do not move that way. Not that soon. Not in the cold, and definitely not with that amount of deliberate and rhythmic force. Fear began to suffocate reason. Hospital training states clearly, if there is any indication of life or error, you verify immediately. It is protocol, but I hesitated. I hesitated because what I was considering was a medical impossibility. That woman had been declared dead by competent professionals. Paramedics worked on her for 30 minutes with advanced equipment. A doctor confirmed the death. She had been locked in the cold for hours. There was no logical scenario where she was alive, but reality was banging on the door. The thud came again, much stronger and more desperate this time. The heavy steel door actually moved, maybe a quarter of an inch outward, straining the hermetic seal before locking back. And then I heard the sound that sent ice flooding through my veins and paralyzed my lungs. It was muffled, distant, filtered by insulation, but unmistakable. A voice. Someone inside that dark, freezing drawer was trying to scream. The sacred barrier between the world of the living and the repository of the dead had been breached from the inside. Panic gave way to action. I grabbed the latch handle and pulled the drawer open violently. The heavy platform slid smoothly on the lubricated rails, revealing the interior. And there she was, Timesha Beauchamp. Her eyes were open, not the glazed, fixed, unfocused stare of the dead I'm used to seeing daily, but eyes fully open, moving, aware and terrified. Her mouth was wide open, gasping desperately for air, choking on the oxygen that had been denied to her for hours. The scene was a horror that no medical school prepares you to see. Her hand, the one I had respectfully positioned and crossed by her side hours earlier, was raised in a defensive position. She had been punching the inside of the drawer door in total darkness. She was alive. The shock was so intense that for a second my brain refused to process the image. A woman declared dead, tagged and archived, was looking at me with pure panic, shivering uncontrollably from the cold. I do not remember making the conscious decision to call for help. I only recall hearing my own voice shouting into the wall emergency phone. "Code blue in the morgue. I need a crash cart and medical team immediately. The patient in drawer 7 is alive and in respiratory distress." As I spoke, I began pulling her out, transferring her to the gurney with trembling hands. I touched her wrist. The heart was beating, weak and irregular, but it was there. The impossible had just become my responsibility. The emergency team burst into the room within 90 seconds. They train for everything, but a code blue in the morgue is a scenario that feels like a glitch in reality. They took control instantly. Oxygen mask applied, intravenous lines started, electrodes stuck to cold skin. They worked with technical efficiency, but I saw the hesitation in their eyes, the exchanged glances of pure disbelief. Trying to save a life in a room designed exclusively to store death is a violation of the natural order that disturbed everyone. I stepped back as they worked, watching the ECG monitor fire erratic green lines. I explained breathlessly. "Brought in dead 3 hours ago, refrigerated storage, heard movement, open drawer, alive." The words tasted like ash in my mouth. It sounded like madness, but the evidence was there, struggling to breathe on the gurney. The sterile silence of the morgue was shattered by the frantic beeping of machines, proving that medical science had made a catastrophic and unforgivable mistake that night. The attending physician, Dr. Morrison, arrived pale. She looked at the monitors, then at Timesha, and then at me with intense scrutiny. She asked if I was certain this was the same patient. I showed the paperwork. Same name, same age, same time of death. The corpse from 3:14 a.m. was displaying vital signs at 7 now. It was an administrative impossibility, manifesting as a living miracle, or a curse. The air in the room grew heavy with the weight of responsibility and the horror of what had almost happened. At 6:52, they transported her back to the intensive care unit. The doors closed, leaving me alone in the sudden silence. Drawer number 7 was still open, a dark mouth gaping in the stainless steel wall. The paperwork on my desk still listed a deceased patient who was now breathing on the 3rd floor. I stared at that empty compartment and tried to comprehend the terror of waking up inside. total darkness, paralyzing cold, and the crushing realization of being buried alive in a metal box, the investigation started immediately. Medical boards, administration, legal teams, everyone rushed to understand how a living woman ended up in a cooler. The paramedics were questioned aggressively. They swore they followed protocol, checked pulse, breathing, cardiac activity, performed CPR for 30 minutes. With no response, they consulted a doctor who pronounced her dead. They did everything right by the book, but the book failed them in the most horrific way possible. The failure wasn't human, it was biological. The medical term for this anomaly is Lazarus Syndrome, auto-resuscitation after the cessation of cardiopulmonary resuscitation. It is a phenomenon as rare as it is terrifying, documented only a few dozen times in history. Essentially, the heart restarts itself. After attempts to revive fail and the patient is declared dead, spontaneous circulation returns minutes or hours later. This defies the binary definition of life and death. It suggests that death is not an exact moment, but a gray and uncertain process. The exact mechanism remains a mystery to modern science. Theories range from pressure changes in the ribcage after CPR ends to the delayed action of drugs like adrenaline administered during aid. Trapped air in the lungs might release, jump-starting the system, but the truth is frighteningly simple. We don't exactly know why it happens. For Timesha, her biological systems entered a suspension deep enough to fool machines and doctors, only to reignite in the solitude of the morgue. Timesha remained in the ICU for 2 weeks. Her heart suffered significant damage from the initial event and the period without adequate circulation in the cold drawer. She required mechanical support and intensive medication. The doctors were honest. Although she had survived the morgue, the prognosis was grim. The time without oxygen caused devastation to the brain. She was alive, but trapped in a body failing piece by piece, a prisoner of her own traumatic resurrection and the aftermath of that cold. I visited the ICU 3 days later. Administration thought it might help with emotional closure. She was sedated, connected to machines. Her mother was there and thanked me for opening the drawer, for hearing the call. I didn't have the courage to tell her that I hesitated, that I stood there trying to rationalize the sound of the hand hitting the steel. That hesitation haunts me. Those lost seconds could have made the difference between recovery and permanent damage. The weight of her gratitude was worse than if she had screamed at me. The family decided to sue the hospital, the paramedics, and the doctor. The legal case questioned whether protocols were followed, or if there was negligence in vital verification. But reading the reports, I realized that medicine sometimes encounters situations that defy everything. Timesha's case wasn't just an error. It was an event that exposed the fragility of our understanding of the end. The certainty of death is sometimes just a dangerous statistical illusion, and Timesha paid the price for that flaw in our knowledge. Timesha passed away definitively on October 18, 2020, almost 2 months after the night I pulled her living body from the drawer. Her heart, devastated by the initial event and the lack of circulation in the cold, finally gave out. For the family, finding out she was alive only to lose her again weeks later was an unimaginable cruelty. Perhaps it was harder to accept than the first error. The cycle of hope and grief destroyed us all, leaving a trail of unanswered questions. I think about that night incessantly, the sound of the hand hitting, the sight of the terrified eyes. The question that haunts me has no answer. What did she experience inside? Did she wake up in absolute darkness and cold, unable to move or scream? Did consciousness return, gradually or suddenly? How long did she fight against the steel before I heard the first thud? Timesha took that terrible secret with her to the grave, leaving me only with the horror of fertile imagination and guilt. The incident forced a radical change in hospital protocols. Now, bodies are observed for a mandatory period before refrigerated storage. Any sign of movement is investigated as a maximum emergency. These are necessary and vital changes, but they came too late for Timesha Beauchamp. Her legacy is a new level of vigilance, written in safety procedures that try to prevent the impossible from happening again under our roof, transforming the morgue into a guarded waiting room. This fundamentally changed how I work. I no longer blindly trust death certificates. I watch bodies with a necessary paranoia. I check vital signs more frequently than required. When I seal that heavy door, I always wonder if some spark of consciousness remains inside. Science says it shouldn't be possible, but I know it is. I saw the impossibility look back at me. Doubt is now my constant companion on every lonely shift. Some colleagues think I have developed a morbid obsession. They point out that Lazarus Syndrome is statistically irrelevant, a once-in-a-career event. They are probably right. The chance of it happening twice is 0. But logic and statistics fail against the visceral memory of opening that drawer. They didn't hear the sound. They didn't see the panic in the eyes of a supposed corpse. I did, and that sight nullifies any rational comfort numbers might offer. I still work the night shift at Detroit Memorial. I still receive bodies, document and store them. But every time I close a drawer, I stand still and listen for a few extra seconds in the silence. Any unusual sound is investigated immediately. The other attendants know what happened. We don't talk much about it, but the story hangs in the air. The night Marcus pulled a living woman out of drawer 7. It has become a cautionary legend that keeps us alert, watching over the sleep of the dead. The media focused on the medical error and the multi-million-dollar lawsuit. What they didn't capture was the human reality of the moment, the sound of a hand striking metal from the inside. I attended her funeral, not as a hospital employee, but as a witness to her final suffering. I sat in the back, listening about the dreams of a 20-year-old girl who died twice. Her mother didn't blame me, but I carry the weight of those seconds of initial hesitation as an invisible scar on my conscience. I have researched everything about the syndrome since then. Technical knowledge helps, but it doesn't solve the existential questions. Where was Timesha during those hours of clinical death? What is death if someone can come back from it? The border between alive and dead, which I thought was a concrete wall, revealed itself to be a transparent and fragile curtain. My job doesn't require philosophy, but I can't help it. Because someone alive was in my care, and I nearly failed to save her from eternal darkness. In the end, I didn't save Timesha Beauchamp's life permanently. I gave her only a few more painful weeks, but I learned an eternal lesson. I never close a morgue drawer without listening again. I will never ignore an unusual sound. I will never assume death is certain just because a paper says it is. I learned this the night drawer 7 opened, and what came out of there changed my life. My job now is not just to guard the dead, but to listen intently for the living.